The champagne glass hit the marble floor with a crystalline crack that silenced every conversation in the Grand Hilton ballroom. Victoria's face had gone paper white as the superintendent's voice echoed through the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing our anonymous donor who has quietly contributed $3.5 million to support underprivileged students over the past decade. The spotlight found me at table 12, wearing the same worn suit jacket I'd owned for 18 years. I didn't say anything, but something inside me shifted into perfect alignment, like tumblers in a lock finally clicking into place. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to Catherine Reed's number. But let me tell you how this all started, because sometimes the best revenge is just letting people reveal exactly who they really are. The engagement celebration was supposed to be a family affair. Intimate, Victoria had said. Just close friends and relatives at the country club where her parents held membership. I'd driven my 14-year-old Toyota through the valet circle, watching the attendant's barely concealed smirk as he handed me the ticket. The ballroom sparkled with crystal and silver, round tables dressed in cream linens, each centerpiece worth more than my monthly grocery budget. Nathan found me by the bar, his face bright with happiness. At 25, he had his mother's gentle eyes and, unfortunately, my tendency to see the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. Dad, you made it. He pulled me into a hug that smelled like expensive cologne and nervous energy. Victoria's been looking forward to meeting more of the family. I adjusted my tie, the same navy silk one I'd worn to his high school graduation. Wouldn't miss it, son. Where is the lucky bride-to-be? Over there with her parents. Nathan pointed across the room to where Victoria held court near the windows, her laugh carrying above the ambient conversation. Even from a distance, I could see the way she commanded attention, the way people leaned in when she spoke. She was undeniably beautiful in that polished, expensive way that comes from good genes and better skincare. She looks lovely. The words came easily because they were true. Victoria was lovely, in the same way a museum piece is lovely, perfect, untouchable, and completely aware of its own value. I was thinking, Nathan continued, his voice dropping slightly, maybe you could give a toast tonight? Something about family, about how proud you are. Victoria's dad is speaking, and her uncle, and I thought, of course. I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the fine wool of his suit jacket. Custom tailored, I noted. Victoria's influence was already apparent. I'd be honored. We made our way through the crowd, Nathan introducing me to faces I'd never seen before. Investment bankers, surgeons, real estate developers. The kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and sent their children to private schools that cost more than my annual salary. I shook hands and made small talk, fielding the inevitable questions about my profession with practiced ease. Benjamin's a guidance counselor, Nathan would say, pride evident in his voice. He's helped hundreds of kids get into college. The responses were always the same. A brief smile, a polite nod, and then the conversation would drift toward topics I couldn't contribute to: ski trips to Aspen, charity galas, investment opportunities. I didn't mind. I'd learned long ago that wealth speaks its own language, and I was fluent enough to navigate these waters when necessary. Victoria appeared at Nathan's elbow like a beautiful storm cloud, her smile bright enough to power the chandelier above us. Benjamin. She air-kissed both my cheeks, her perfume expensive and subtle. I'm so excited to finally meet Nathan's father. I've heard absolutely everything about you. All good things, I hope. Oh, of course. Her laugh was like silver bells, perfectly calibrated for maximum charm. Nathan's told me how you've sacrificed so much for him. Living in that tiny apartment, driving that old car, working at the school for all these years. It's so admirable how you've managed on a teacher's salary. Guidance counselor, I corrected gently. And we've managed just fine. I'm sure you have. Victoria's eyes sparkled with what I initially mistook for warmth. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Nathan and I have been discussing the wedding, and we're trying to keep things elegant, sophisticated. You understand. Nathan shifted beside me, his discomfort palpable. Victoria, maybe we should. No, it's fine. She placed a manicured hand on his arm. I think Benjamin will appreciate honesty. The thing is, we're having the ceremony at the Blackwood estate. Very exclusive venue, very particular about their image. And some of our guests are quite prominent in the community. I waited, watching her face carefully. Years of counseling teenagers had taught me to read the subtext behind carefully chosen words. So what I'm wondering, Victoria continued, her voice honey-sweet, is whether you might be more comfortable attending the reception afterward? The ceremony itself will be quite formal, lots of photographers, and I'd hate for you to feel out of place in in what you usually wear. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathan's face had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Around us, conversation continued. Glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, but our little triangle had become its own island of tension. I see. I kept my voice level, professional. And what would make me more comfortable, in your opinion? Victoria's smile never wavered. Well, if you did want to attend the ceremony, maybe we could arrange for some appropriate attire? I know a wonderful men's shop that rents formal wear. Nothing too expensive, of course. And perhaps, have you ever considered a retirement home? I know that sounds harsh, but Nathan and I will be starting our own family soon, and it might be nice for you to be around people your own age. People who understand your situation. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked at Nathan, whose face had gone from pale to green. His mouth worked silently, loyalty warring with mortification. I thought about the spreadsheet on my laptop at home, the one that tracked a portfolio worth $28.3 million. I thought about the scholarship fund I'd been quietly building for 15 years. I thought about the apartment Victoria found so embarrassing. The same apartment where I'd raised her future husband after his mother abandoned us both. That's very thoughtful of you, Victoria. My voice remained steady, almost friendly. You've clearly put a lot of consideration into this. I just want everyone to be comfortable. Her relief was visible. She'd expected a fight, prepared for anger. My calm acceptance seemed to catch her off guard. Of course you do. I glanced around the room, noting the faces turned in our direction, the way conversations had quieted. An audience was forming. Perfect. Tell me, have you given any thought to what you'll do after the wedding? Career-wise, Victoria blinked, thrown by the subject change. Oh, well, I'll be managing our household, of course. Nathan makes enough that I won't need to work. Though I might do some charity work, just to stay involved in the community. Charity work. How noble. I nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of which, I have an event next week that you might find interesting. The Educational Leadership Gala. Very dull affair, I'm afraid. Just a bunch of educators and donors getting together to talk about underprivileged students. Probably not your scene, but you're welcome to attend if you're interested in that sort of thing. Oh, Victoria's smile flickered. That's sweet, but we'll probably be busy with honeymoon planning. Of course, busy lives, important people. I reached into my wallet and pulled out my business card, plain white cardstock with simple black lettering. Well, if you change your mind, here's my information. Sometimes these boring education events can be surprisingly illuminating. Victoria took the card with the tips of her fingers, as if it might contaminate her manicure. I'll keep it in mind. Wonderful. I turned to Nathan, whose face still carried the stunned expression of someone who'd witnessed a car accident in slow motion. Son, I think I'll head home now. Early morning tomorrow. Dad, wait. Nathan started, but I was already moving, weaving through the crowd toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Victoria's voice, bright and cheerful, resuming its previous volume. The incident was over, forgotten, filed away under the category of awkward family moments that would become funny stories in a few years. The poor guidance counselor properly put in his place. I retrieved my Toyota from the valet, tipping the attendant $5 and ignoring his surprised expression. The drive home took 20 minutes through residential streets lined with modest houses, their windows glowing with the warm light of families gathered around dinner tables. Normal families, uncomplicated families. My apartment sat on the second floor of a converted Victorian. 3 rooms that I'd painted myself and furnished with pieces collected over 2 decades. Nothing matched, nothing impressed. Everything served its purpose. I hung my suit jacket in the closet next to 4 others just like it, all purchased during my consulting days when image mattered and expense accounts covered the difference between adequate and excellent. The laptop sat on my kitchen table, silver and ordinary. I opened it and navigated to the password-protected folder that contained my real life. Spreadsheets glowed in the blue light, rows and columns that told a different story than the one Victoria had invented for me. Morgan Stanley portfolio, $8.7 million. Real estate holdings, $4.2 million. Municipal bonds, $3.8 million. Tech stocks, $6.9 million. Education fund, $4.7 million. Total assets, $28.3 million. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of my embarrassing little apartment, surrounded by furniture that Victoria would probably donate to charity. Outside, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life continued in its ordinary way, unaware that a guidance counselor had just been dismissed from his own son's wedding plans. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Catherine Reed's number. Catherine managed my portfolio with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker and the discretion of a confessor. At 62, she commanded more respect in financial circles than most men half her age, and she'd been handling my investments since I'd first walked into her office 18 years ago with a 7-year-old child and a shattered life. Benjamin. Her voice carried the slight rasp of someone who'd spent decades negotiating deals in smoke-filled boardrooms. Working late again? Catherine, I need a favor. Name it. The Educational Leadership Gala next week. I'd like to make my contribution public this year. A pause. Catherine understood the implications immediately. All of it. All of it. And I'd like you there when I do. May I ask why? I thought about Victoria's smile, about Nathan's stricken face, about retirement homes and rented formal wear, and the assumption that a guidance counselor couldn't possibly understand sophistication. Let's call it a teaching moment. I'll handle the arrangements. The full $3.5 million. The full amount. And Catherine? Make sure they announce it properly. Name, contribution history, everything. Understood. Anything else? Yes. I'll need copies of my portfolio summary. All of it. Clean copies, suitable for public viewing. Catherine's laugh was sharp and knowing. Benjamin Foster, you magnificent bastard. What have you done? Nothing yet, I said, closing my laptop. But I'm about to teach someone a very expensive lesson about the difference between wealth and worth. The next morning arrived gray and cold, Seattle's typical February offering. I dressed in my usual uniform, khaki slacks, button-down shirt, cardigan that had seen better decades, and drove to Jefferson High School, where I'd spent the last 18 years helping kids navigate the treacherous waters between adolescence and adulthood. My office sat at the end of the guidance wing, a cluttered sanctuary filled with college brochures, scholarship applications, and thank-you letters from students who'd found their way to futures they'd never imagined possible. The walls were covered with graduation photos, wedding invitations, birth announcements, the paper trail of lives I'd helped launch. Sarah Martinez knocked on my doorframe at 8:15, her acceptance letter to Stanford clutched in trembling hands. Mr. Foster, I got in. I actually got in. I looked up from my computer, where I'd been reviewing financial aid applications. Sarah stood in my doorway like a small miracle, her face bright with disbelief and joy. 18 years old, valedictorian, first in her family to attend college. Her parents cleaned office buildings at night and picked fruit during the harvest season. 3 months ago, she'd been convinced that college was a luxury her family couldn't afford. Congratulations, Sarah. Though I have to say, I'm not surprised. But the financial aid package. She sank into the chair across from my desk, her voice barely above a whisper. Full scholarship, everything covered. Room, board, books, even a stipend for living expenses. How is that possible? I smiled, remembering the phone call I'd made to Stanford's financial aid office in December. A quiet conversation with an admissions counselor who owed me a favor from 5 years earlier when I'd helped his nephew navigate a difficult family situation. You earned it, Sarah. Your grades, your essay, your interview, you earned every penny of it. But I know other kids with better test scores who didn't get anything close to this. Test scores aren't everything. Sometimes it's about potential, about character, about what someone will do with the opportunity they're given. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving mascara smudges on her knuckles. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. Just make the most of it. And maybe someday when you're successful and established, remember where you came from. Help the next kid who needs a hand up. She nodded, clutching the letter like a lifeline. After she left, I returned to my computer, opening the spreadsheet that tracked my education fund. $4.7 million, distributed over 15 years to students who needed it most. Merit scholarships, emergency grants, college preparation programs, all funded quietly, anonymously, through foundations and trusts that kept my name off the paperwork. Kids like Sarah never knew where the money came from. They thought they'd won academic lotteries, beaten impossible odds through sheer merit. And maybe they had. I just made sure the odds were a little less impossible than they appeared. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Dad, we need to talk. Can I come by tonight? I typed back, of course. I'll make dinner. The rest of the day passed in its usual rhythm. College applications, transcript requests, crisis counseling for a sophomore whose parents were divorcing. Normal problems, solved with normal tools of patience, listening, strategic phone calls to people who owed me favors accumulated over 2 decades of quiet networking. At 6 o'clock, I drove home through rush hour traffic, stopping at the grocery store for ingredients Nathan had loved since childhood. Carnitas, fresh tortillas, pico de gallo made with tomatoes from the farmer's market. Simple food, the kind Victoria would probably classify as too ethnic for sophisticated palates. Nathan arrived at 7, looking like he hadn't slept since the engagement party. His suit from the previous night had been replaced with jeans and a sweater, but the haunted expression remained unchanged. Dad. He stood in my doorway like a reluctant visitor, hands shoved deep in his pockets. About last night. Come in, son. Dinner's almost ready. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework for 12 years, where we'd eaten takeout Chinese on nights when grief made cooking impossible, where I'd taught him to balance a checkbook and change a tire and treat people with dignity regardless of their bank account balance. Victoria didn't mean what she said. Nathan picked at his food, appetite clearly absent. She's just nervous about the wedding. Her parents have strong opinions about things, and she's trying to keep everyone happy. I chewed thoughtfully, tasting memories in every bite. What exactly didn't she mean, Nathan? The part about my clothes, or the part about the retirement home? Nathan winced. She's not used to. She grew up differently than we did. Her family has money, lots of it. They have expectations. I see. And do you share those expectations? No, of course not. But his response came too quickly, practiced. The kind of answer that's been rehearsed in mirrors and justified in private conversations. It's just, things will be different after we're married. We'll be living in her world more than ours. Her world. I set down my fork, studying my son's face. And what world is that exactly? You know what I mean. Country clubs, charity events, business dinners. The kind of places where image matters, where people judge you based on appearances. And you think I don't belong in those places. Nathan's silence was answer enough. I looked around my kitchen, seeing it suddenly through Victoria's eyes. The outdated appliances I couldn't afford to replace. The mismatched dishes accumulated over years of thrift store shopping. The refrigerator covered with takeout menus and appointment cards and photos of Nathan at various stages of growing up. Nathan, let me ask you something. Do you remember when your mother left? His face tightened. We'd discussed this exactly 3 times in 18 years, and never in detail. Dad, I don't think. You were 7 years old. She'd been unhappy for months, maybe years. The consulting work kept me traveling, and when I was home, I was always on the phone with clients. She felt neglected, unimportant. I remember. She gave me an ultimatum. Choose the job or choose the family. I couldn't do both, not the way she needed me to. Nathan nodded, his food growing cold between us. I chose you, I continued. I walked away from a partnership track at Morgan Stanley. 6-figure salary, corner office, expense account, the whole package. I chose you. I know you did. And I'm grateful. I'm not telling you this to make you grateful. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Every choice has consequences. Every sacrifice creates ripple effects that last for decades. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 18 years living with the consequences of choosing love over money, family over status, character over appearance. And I'd make the same choice again, every single day. Nathan pulled his hand away, frustration finally breaking through his careful politeness. But don't you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed? If you'd kept climbing that ladder? No, I said simply. I don't wonder. I know exactly what would have happened. What? I would have become the kind of man who judges people by their clothes and their cars and their zip codes. The kind of man who thinks wealth and worth are the same thing. The kind of man your fiancé wants me to be ashamed of not becoming. The words hung between us like a challenge. Nathan stared at his plate, processing implications he'd never considered. Victoria isn't like that, he said finally, but the conviction had leaked out of his voice. Isn't she? She's just protective of her family's reputation. Her father built a business empire from nothing. Her mother graduated magna cum laude from Wellesley. They worked hard for their success. And they assume I didn't work hard for mine. Well, Nathan gestured vaguely around the kitchen. I mean, look at where we live, Dad. Look at how we live. If you'd stayed at Morgan Stanley. If I'd stayed at Morgan Stanley, I interrupted. You would have spent your childhood in boarding schools and summer camps, raised by nannies and tutors while I played golf with clients and attended charity galas where rich people congratulated themselves for solving problems they'd helped create. That's not fair. Fair. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Nathan, let me tell you about fair. Fair would have been your mother staying to help raise the child she brought into this world. Fair would have been family courts that didn't automatically assume a working single father couldn't provide adequate care. Fair would have been guidance counselor salaries that actually reflected the value of the work we do. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the edge that had crept into my voice. But unfair can be a gift. I continued, my tone softening. Unfair taught me that money isn't the same as wealth. That success isn't measured by how much you can spend, but by how much you can give. That the richest man in the room is often the one who doesn't need anyone to know it. Dad, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but Victoria and I are building a life together. And that life includes her family, her friends, her world. I can't ask her to choose between me and everything she's ever known. I'm not asking you to ask her to choose. I'm asking you to make sure you know what you're choosing. Nathan stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. I'm choosing happiness, Dad. I'm choosing someone who loves me, who wants to build a future with me, who makes me laugh and makes me want to be better. And does she make you want to be better, Nathan? Or does she make you want to be different? He paused in the doorway, his back to me. What's the difference? Better means growing into the best version of yourself. Different means becoming someone else entirely. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the debris of a conversation that had changed everything and nothing. My phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. Gala arrangements confirmed. Full disclosure, portfolio summary prepared. Are you sure about this? I typed back, more sure than I've ever been. The Educational Leadership Gala was held annually at the Grand Hilton, a fundraising event that brought together educators, philanthropists, and politicians to discuss the state of public education. I'd been attending for 15 years, usually sitting at the back, applauding when appropriate, writing checks that helped fund programs for kids whose parents cleaned office buildings and picked fruit. This year felt different. This year, I wore my best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd purchased for Nathan's high school graduation, and arrived early to review the seating arrangements with Catherine. She met me in the lobby, elegant as always in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. At 62, Catherine Reed commanded rooms with nothing more than her presence. Silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, jewelry that whispered rather than shouted, the kind of understated elegance that old money wears like a second skin. Benjamin. She kissed my cheek, her perfume subtle and expensive. You look nervous. Not nervous. Focused. Ah, the difference between anxious and determined. She smiled, studying my face. In 30 years of managing money, I've learned to recognize that particular expression. It usually precedes someone making a very expensive point. $3.5 million worth of point. Indeed. And you're certain this is how you want to make it. I thought about Victoria's smile, about retirement homes and rented formal wear, about my son's apologetic explanations for my embarrassing existence. Catherine, in all the years you've managed my portfolio, have you ever questioned my judgment? Never. Then don't start tonight. The ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight, round tables dressed in white linens, each place setting worth more than most people's weekly salary. 500 guests mingled over cocktails, their conversations a symphony of networking and social positioning. I recognized faces from previous years, school board members, university presidents, tech executives whose foundations funded literacy programs and STEM initiatives. Victoria and Nathan sat at table 7, near the front of the room. She wore a dress that cost more than my car payment, her jewelry catching the chandelier light with every gesture. Nathan looked handsome and uncomfortable in equal measure, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. I was seated at table 12, among the veteran educators and minor donors. People like me who gave what they could and asked for nothing in return. We exchanged pleasantries about budget cuts and standardized testing, shared stories about students who'd overcome impossible odds to achieve extraordinary things. The program began with dinner and moved through the usual sequence of speeches and presentations. The superintendent spoke about achievement gaps and funding challenges. A student from Roosevelt High shared her story of rising from homelessness to Harvard acceptance. A tech CEO announced his company's $1 million commitment to computer science education. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, the superintendent's voice carried across the silent ballroom. Every year we recognize the generosity of donors who make our work possible. Tonight, I want to acknowledge someone whose contribution has been truly extraordinary. Victoria's attention was elsewhere, her eyes scanning the room for photographers and social media opportunities. Nathan was checking his phone under the table, probably responding to work emails. For 15 years, one individual has quietly supported our most vulnerable students through anonymous donations that have totaled $3.5 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Conversations stopped. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. $3.5 million was serious money, even in a room full of wealthy people. This donor has funded emergency scholarships, college preparation programs, and direct assistance to families in crisis. Tonight, for the first time, he's agreed to let us recognize his generosity publicly. Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Something in the superintendent's tone had caught her attention, some note of reverence that demanded focus. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing Benjamin Foster. The spotlight found me at table 12, wearing my 18-year-old suit jacket and sitting among the educators Victoria had dismissed as beneath her notice. For a moment, time suspended itself. 500 faces turned in my direction. 500 minds processing the impossibility of what they just heard. The guidance counselor, the embarrassing father-in-law, the man who needed to rent formal wear and consider retirement homes. $3.5 million. Victoria's champagne glass hit the marble floor with a crystalline crack that shattered the silence. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, followed by a collective intake of breath as 500 people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. I stood slowly, acknowledging the applause with a slight nod. Around me, my table companions were on their feet, their faces bright with surprise and pride. These were people who knew me, who'd watched me eat rubber chicken at fundraising dinners for 15 years, who'd assumed I was just another underpaid educator doing his best with limited resources. The walk to the podium felt like a journey through someone else's life. Each step carried me further from the man Victoria had dismissed and closer to the truth I'd kept hidden for 18 years. Behind me, conversations buzzed with questions, theories, attempts to reconcile what they'd known with what they'd just learned. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, looking out at an audience that suddenly saw me completely differently. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of shock and something approaching horror. Nathan was staring at me like I was a stranger who'd borrowed his father's face. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady in the sudden quiet. "When I started teaching 18 years ago, someone told me that education was the only investment guaranteed to pay dividends for generations. I took that advice seriously." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was respectful laughter, the kind reserved for people whose wisdom has been proven by their actions. I didn't start out as an educator. I spent 7 years as a financial consultant at Morgan Stanley, helping wealthy people become wealthier. Good work, important work, but it wasn't my calling. I found Nathan's face in the crowd, saw the confusion and something that might have been pride warring in his expression. My calling found me when my son was 7 years old and I had to choose between a career that was building my bank account and a family that was falling apart. I chose family. I chose to become the kind of man who measured success by the lives he could change rather than the zeros in his portfolio. The silence was complete now, 500 people hanging on every word. Some people assume that choice meant giving up financial success. They assume that guidance counselors are guidance counselors because they couldn't do anything else, couldn't build wealth, couldn't compete in the real world. I paused, letting my eyes find Victoria's table. She was still frozen, her face pale as moonlight. But here's what I learned in my consulting years that has served me well in education. The best investments are the ones no one else sees coming. For 18 years, I've been investing in things that mattered. Minds that needed encouragement. Dreams that needed funding. Futures that needed a chance. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the portfolio summary Catherine had prepared. Clean pages, professional presentation, numbers that told a story very different from the one Victoria had written for me. "I never stopped being an investor," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "I just started investing in things that actually matter." The applause began slowly, scattered clapping from the educators who understood the magnitude of what I'd revealed. Then it spread, growing stronger as the full impact registered. 500 people on their feet, acknowledging not just the money I'd given, but the lie they'd all believed about what success looked like. I remained at the podium until the applause died down, then walked slowly back to my table. The crowd parted like water, creating a path lined with faces that had completely recalibrated their understanding of who I was and what I represented. Catherine met me halfway, her smile sharp as a blade. "Benjamin Foster," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I think it's time people knew exactly how successful you've been." She handed me a leather portfolio, then raised her voice to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, since we're being transparent tonight, perhaps you'd like to know that Mr. Foster's total investment portfolio is currently valued at $28.3 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. $28.3 million. The guidance counselor who drove a 14-year-old Toyota and lived in a modest apartment had accumulated more wealth than most of the executives and entrepreneurs in the room. Victoria's face had gone from pale to green. Around her, conversations erupted as people processed the impossibility of what they'd just learned. The poor relation, the embarrassing father-in-law, the man who needed to consider retirement homes, was worth more than most of them combined. I reached my table and sat down quietly, accepting congratulations from colleagues who'd suddenly realized they'd been eating dinner next to one of the wealthiest people in the room. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and business cards, requests for investment advice and philanthropic partnerships. But my attention was focused on table 7, where Victoria sat in stunned silence while Nathan stared at me across the crowded ballroom. His face cycled through emotions I couldn't quite read: shock, confusion, something that might have been pride, and something else that looked dangerously close to anger. The evening ended with the usual networking and small talk, but the energy had shifted completely. I was no longer the humble educator at the back of the room. I was Benjamin Foster, the millionaire philanthropist, the man who'd been quietly changing lives while everyone else was busy talking about it. Catherine appeared at my elbow as the crowd began to thin. Well, that certainly made an impression. Mission accomplished. And what happens now? I looked across the room where Victoria and Nathan were gathering their things, her movements sharp with barely controlled fury, his deliberate and measured. Now, I said, we find out what people are really made of when the masks come off. The drive home took place in silence, my phone buzzing continuously with texts and calls from people who suddenly wanted to be my friend. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the road ahead and the conversation I knew was coming. Nathan's car was already in my parking space when I arrived at my apartment. He sat in the driver's seat, engine off, staring at nothing. I parked on the street and walked to his window. We need to talk, he said. Yes, we do. My apartment felt smaller with Nathan pacing through it like a caged animal. His careful composure had shattered completely, replaced by raw emotion I hadn't seen since his teenage years. $28 million. He stopped in front of my kitchen table, where my laptop sat closed and innocent. $28 million, and you let me think you were struggling. I never said I was struggling. You live like you're struggling. This apartment, your car, your clothes. I live the way I choose to live. Why? The word exploded out of him. Why live like this when you could afford anything? Why let Victoria treat you like you're some kind of charity case? Why let me feel sorry for you? I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling suddenly exhausted. Because money changes things, Nathan. Money changes how people see you, how they treat you, how they relate to you. It changes everything. So you just decided to lie about it? I never lied. I told you I was a guidance counselor who'd left consulting to raise his son. All of that is true. But you didn't tell me you were rich. No, I didn't. And now you know why. Nathan stopped pacing, confusion replacing anger. What do you mean? I mean that 3 hours ago you were embarrassed by your poor father who needed help buying appropriate clothes and should consider moving to a retirement home. Now you're angry that your rich father didn't tell you he was rich. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of my bank account. The words hit home. Nathan's face went through several expressions before settling on something like shame. That's not. I never. Nathan, let me ask you something. When you were growing up, did you ever feel deprived? Did you ever feel like we didn't have enough? No, but did you get everything you needed for school? Sports equipment, computers, tutoring when you struggled with calculus? Yes. Did we take vacations? Go to movies? Eat in restaurants? Yes, Dad. But that's not the point. What is the point, then? Nathan sank into the chair across from me, his anger deflating into something more complicated. The point is that you let me believe we were just getting by. You let me think you'd sacrificed everything for me, that you were barely making ends meet on a teacher's salary. I did sacrifice everything for you, I said quietly. Just not what you think I sacrificed. What does that mean? I opened my laptop and turned it toward him, showing him the spreadsheet that contained my real life. It means I sacrificed the need to be seen as successful. I sacrificed the ego boost that comes from people knowing you have money. I sacrificed the easy relationships that wealth can buy. Nathan stared at the numbers, his face pale in the laptop's glow. Every month for 18 years, I could have moved us to a bigger house, bought a newer car, joined the country club where Victoria's parents play golf. But I didn't, because I wanted you to grow up understanding that a person's worth isn't measured by their possessions. But why hide it completely? Why not just, I don't know, live modestly but let me know the truth? Because knowing changes everything. Look at your face right now, Nathan. Look at how you're looking at me differently than you did this morning. He was quiet for a long moment, processing implications he'd never considered. Victoria's going to lose her mind, he said finally. Victoria already lost her mind. Did you see her face tonight? She's probably trying to figure out how to apologize, how to make this right. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Nathan, Victoria isn't going to apologize. She's going to be furious that I embarrassed her publicly. She's going to blame me for making her look foolish instead of examining why she made those assumptions in the first place. As if summoned by our conversation, Nathan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." Nathan hesitated, then swiped to accept the call. Victoria's voice filled my small kitchen, tight with barely controlled rage. "Nathan, where are you? We need to talk about what just happened." "I'm at my dad's. We're talking now." "Well, stop talking and come home. I've been fielding calls for the past hour from people who want to know why I didn't know my future father-in-law was worth $30 million. 28.3, I corrected quietly. "This isn't funny, Benjamin." Victoria's voice sharpened. "You made me look like an idiot tonight. You humiliated me in front of 500 people." "I didn't humiliate you, Victoria. You humiliated yourself. How was I supposed to know? You live like a pauper. You dress like you shop at thrift stores." "I do shop at thrift stores," I interrupted. "Some of my favorite shirts cost $3. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Normal people with your kind of money don't live in tiny apartments and drive cars that belong in junkyards. Normal people with my kind of money didn't choose family over status. Normal people with my kind of money didn't spend 18 years proving that character matters more than appearances." "Character?" Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You lied to us for years. You let me plan a modest wedding because I thought we needed to accommodate your limited budget. You let Nathan feel guilty about wanting nice things because he thought you couldn't afford them. I never told you to accommodate anything. You assumed my worth based on my appearance, and you planned accordingly. That says something about you, not about me." The line went quiet for several seconds. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had dropped to something dangerous. "Nathan, you need to choose. Right now. You can have a father who plays games with people's emotions and humiliates his family for sport. Or you can have a wife who wants to build a real life with you." Nathan looked at me across the table, his face a battlefield of conflicting loyalties. "Victoria," he said slowly, "that's not a choice I'm willing to make." "Then you've already made it." The line went dead. Nathan stared at his phone, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "She'll call back," he said finally. "She's angry, but she'll call back." "Maybe. And what will you say when she does?" "I don't know." He looked around my kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. "All these years I thought you were just getting by. I thought the small apartment and the old car meant you couldn't afford better. And now I realize you chose this. You chose to live simply while sitting on millions of dollars. I just can't figure out why." I stood up and walked to the refrigerator, pulling out 2 bottles of beer. I handed one to Nathan and sat back down. "Your mother left because she thought I cared more about money than about family. She was wrong, but by the time I realized that, it was too late to save the marriage. It wasn't too late to save what mattered most. Me, you, and the kind of man I wanted you to become." I took a long drink, tasting memories in the bitter hops. "If I'd raised you knowing we were wealthy, you would have grown up differently. You would have expected things that money can buy. You might have become the kind of person who judges others by their bank accounts. Like Victoria judges you. Like Victoria judges everyone." Nathan was quiet for several minutes, drinking his beer and thinking. Outside, the city settled into its evening rhythm, cars passing on the street below, lives continuing in their ordinary patterns. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on you." "How?" "You have a choice to make, Nathan. You can marry someone who's embarrassed by your family's values, or you can find someone who shares them. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. Victoria showed you tonight who she really is when appearances matter more than reality. She didn't see a father-in-law who'd been quietly generous for 18 years. She saw a liability to her social status." Nathan's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and grimaced. "What does it say?" "She wants me to come home, so we can discuss how to handle this situation. She's already talking about damage control." "And what do you want to do?" Nathan finished his beer and set the bottle down carefully on the table. I want to understand something. If you've had this money all along, why didn't you ever use it to make things easier? Why didn't we ever live better? We did live better. We lived honestly. We lived without pretense. We lived knowing that our relationship was based on love, not on what I could provide for you financially. But you could have provided more. I provided everything you needed. The rest would have been just showing off. Nathan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where his BMW sat next to my Toyota. The contrast that had never bothered me before seemed to matter to him now in a way it hadn't this morning. I need some time to think, he said. Take all the time you need. Will you be okay? After tonight, people are going to treat you differently now. I smiled, remembering the faces at the gala, the sudden shift in attention and respect. Nathan, I've been okay for 18 years without anyone knowing about the money. I think I can handle being okay with people knowing about it. He kissed my forehead the way he had when he was small and I was the center of his universe. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what you were really teaching me. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the same modest furnishings that had sheltered our life together. Tomorrow, everything would be different. People would know who I really was, what I was really worth. The quiet anonymity I'd cultivated for 18 years was gone forever. But tonight, for just a few more hours, I was still just Benjamin Foster, guidance counselor, sitting in his small apartment, drinking beer and remembering what it felt like to choose love over everything else the world said mattered. My phone rang. Catherine's name appeared on the screen. How are you feeling? She asked. Lighter, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Like I've been carrying a secret for so long that I'd forgotten how heavy it was. Any regrets? I thought about Victoria's shattered champagne glass, about Nathan's confused face, about 500 people recalibrating their understanding of success and wealth and worth. None, I said. Not a single one. 3 months later, Nathan called off the wedding. Victoria had spent the intervening weeks trying to reinvent their relationship around my newfound status, suggesting that we all move in together, that I help finance their dream house, that we become the kind of family that appeared in lifestyle magazines. Nathan saw through it all. He saw her calculating eyes when she looked at me now, the way she'd started treating me like a resource rather than a person. He saw what I'd been trying to show him all along. That money reveals character, it doesn't create it. The last I heard, Victoria had moved back to her parents' house, where she could properly appreciate the kind of wealth that announces itself with marble foyers and crystal chandeliers. Nathan moved back in with me, sleeping in his childhood bedroom while he figured out what kind of life he wanted to build. We spent evenings at my kitchen table, talking about investments and philanthropy and the difference between having money and being rich. He started helping me manage the education fund, learning to spot the kids who needed help and the programs that could change lives. He was good at it, better than I'd expected. He had his mother's eye for detail and my stubborn belief that everyone deserved a chance. 6 months after the gala, we established the Foster Foundation for Educational Excellence. Nathan quit his corporate job to run it full-time, and I reduced my counseling hours to help him navigate the world of grants and scholarships and strategic giving. We kept the apartment. Nathan insisted on it, said it reminded him of what really mattered. We bought a house in the suburbs for the foundation's offices, but we came home every night to the same small kitchen where we'd learned that wealth without wisdom is just expensive loneliness. People treat me differently now, of course. Former colleagues who'd barely acknowledged my existence suddenly want to have lunch. Parents who'd never returned my phone calls now invite me to dinner parties. The school board offered me a promotion and a significant raise, apparently having discovered my value the same night everyone else did. I turned them down. I like my small office with its college brochures and thank you letters. I like helping kids navigate the space between dreams and reality. I like being the person who opens doors that seemed permanently closed. Most of all, I like knowing that when Sarah Martinez calls to tell me she's graduated from Stanford with honors and been accepted to medical school, she's calling because she wants to share her joy with someone who believed in her, not because she wants something from someone who can afford to give it. That's the difference between wealth and worth. Wealth is what you accumulate. Worth is what you contribute. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient, you get to discover that the best investment you ever made was the choice to value people over possessions, character over status, love over everything else the world insists should matter more. Victoria taught me something valuable that night at the country club, though I doubt she intended to. She taught me that the most expensive mistake you can make is assuming that someone's worth can be measured by their appearance. Some of us just prefer to let our actions speak louder than our bank accounts. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments below.